The lights dimmed, the applause faded, and for a brief moment, silence. Michael J. Fox stood at the edge of the stage, a faint tremor in his hand and a look in his eyes that stopped the world cold. It wasn't the smile that people had known for decades, the one that had carried them through laughter, love, and impossible hope. No, this time, there was something different. Something final. He looked out at the sea of faces, fans, friends, strangers, and then, with a soft, trembling voice, he said something that no one in the room would ever forget. The words were simple, almost too quiet to catch, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. Within seconds, you could feel it, the air shifting, hearts breaking, people holding back tears without even knowing why. For a man who had made millions smile, it was the first time he had left them speechless. No one knew what he truly meant that night. No one knew if it was a farewell, a confession, or a quiet goodbye hidden behind gratitude. Cameras caught the moment, but even through the screen, something felt different. You could see it in his expression. The acceptance, the peace, the kind of calm that only comes after years of fighting battles the world never sees. Afterward, whispers began to spread. Fans flooded social media. What did he mean by those words? Why did he sound so final? Why did it feel like he was saying goodbye? The truth, as the world would soon discover, was far more emotional, and far more heartbreaking, than anyone expected. Because behind that smile, behind that gentle voice, was a story no one was ready to hear. And somewhere in that darkness, the world began to ask, why is Michael J. Fox saying goodbye now? And tonight, we tell that story. Long before Hollywood lights and global fame, there was a small boy growing up in Edmonton, Alberta, curious, mischievous, and filled with a restless energy that could never quite be contained. His name was Michael Andrew Fox, born June 9, 1961, to Phyllis and William Fox, a payroll clerk and a Canadian Forces sergeant. The Fox family moved often due to his father's military service, hopping from town to town across Canada. Each move brought a new school, new faces, new beginnings. But Michael learned early how to adapt, how to make friends fast, and most importantly, how to make people laugh. He was smaller than most boys his age, a fact that often made him the target of teasing. But rather than fight back, Michael would disarm his classmates with humor. A quick one-liner, a goofy impression, a smirk. Soon enough, the laughter was on his side. His mother noticed something special in him early on, a natural performer, a storyteller even before he knew what that meant. When the family finally settled in Burnaby, near Vancouver, Michael began to dream bigger. He joined school plays, local theater groups, and even tried his luck in front of a camera for the first time. By age 15, while most teenagers were still trying to figure out who they were, Michael already knew what he wanted, to be an actor. He had that spark, not just talent but drive. A hunger to tell stories, to connect. His parents, though cautious, supported him. His father even drove him to auditions around Vancouver. But when Michael landed a role in a Canadian television series, Leo and Me, everything changed. The boy from Burnaby was stepping into a new world, one that promised dreams, fame, and danger all at once. Still, money was tight. Acting in Canada only got him so far. So, at just 18 years old, he made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He packed a small suitcase, said goodbye to his family, and boarded a one-way bus to Los Angeles, the city where dreams were born and broken. He didn't have much, a few $100s, a stubborn belief in himself, and a name he'd soon shorten to Michael J. Fox, because another actor had already taken Michael Fox. The J, he later admitted with a grin, didn't even stand for anything. He just thought it sounded cooler. But beneath the jokes and charm was a young man terrified of failure. He slept on friends' couches, skipped meals, and auditioned endlessly. Casting agents often turned him away, saying he was too short, too young, or too Canadian. Still, he refused to give up. Michael had something that couldn't be measured in inches or experience: heart. And in Hollywood, heart has a funny way of changing everything. It was 1982 when everything finally clicked. NBC was casting a new sitcom about an Ohio family navigating the culture clash between liberal parents and their conservative teenage son. The show was called Family Ties. Michael auditioned for the role of Alex P. Keaton, a bright, suit-wearing, money-obsessed teenager with a heart of gold buried beneath sarcasm and ambition. Producers initially doubted him. They thought he was too small and not the right type. But series creator Gary David Goldberg saw something others didn't, a spark that no one could fake. Michael's timing was impeccable. His charisma radiated through the screen. Within weeks of Family Ties hitting the air, audiences fell in love. Alex P. Keaton wasn't just a character, he was a symbol of a generation. The boy next door who argued politics with his parents but secretly adored them. The funny, confident teen who reminded millions of the American dream. Overnight, Michael became a household name. Fan letters poured in by the thousands. Magazine covers featured his face. Teenagers plastered their walls with his posters. He'd gone from sleeping on sofas to winning 3 Emmy Awards and a Golden Globe before the decade was over. But behind the laughter and applause, life was a whirlwind. Between long filming hours and sudden fame, Michael barely had time to breathe. Interviews, public appearances, fan events, every day felt like a sprint. Yet, even in exhaustion, he never lost his humor. He was known on set for keeping spirits high, cracking jokes, and remembering everyone's names, from fellow actors to the lighting crew. Then, in 1984, as Family Ties soared in ratings, Universal Pictures came calling. They were in trouble with a movie about time travel. The lead actor, Eric Stoltz, wasn't working out, and they needed a replacement, fast. Michael was the first choice, but Family Ties' filming schedule had made him unavailable. This time, though, fortune had other plans. Producers struck a deal, NBC made an exception, and Michael agreed to do both, shooting Family Ties by day and the new movie by night. He was about to star in a film called Back to the Future. No one, not even Michael, could have imagined what that movie would mean for the rest of his life. It all began with a phone call that would rewrite Hollywood history. Michael was in the middle of filming Family Ties when his agent called to say that Universal Pictures wanted him for a new movie, a time travel adventure about a teenager who accidentally journeys 30 years into the past. The role was perfect for him. Quick-witted, fearless, funny, everything that made Michael who he was. But there was one problem. Family Ties' filming schedule was relentless. NBC had already turned down Universal's earlier request to borrow him. So, the role of Marty McFly had been given to another young actor, Eric Stoltz. For 6 weeks, production went ahead with Stoltz in the lead. But something wasn't clicking. Director Robert Zemeckis and producer Steven Spielberg both felt that the movie lacked a certain spark, that electric, unpredictable energy they needed. That's when they made a bold, nearly unthinkable decision. They would recast the lead role and start over. And once again, the name at the top of their wish list was Michael J. Fox. When NBC finally relented and allowed him to do both projects, Michael suddenly found himself living 2 lives, one as Alex P. Keaton by day, and another as Marty McFly by night. For months, his schedule was nothing short of brutal. He would film Family Ties from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., grab a quick meal, and then head straight to the Back to the Future set, shooting until 2 or 3 a.m. He'd sleep just a few hours before doing it all over again. Some nights, he later recalled, I didn't even know what day it was. I'd go from one world to another without realizing which script I was saying lines from. But somehow, he made it work. And when Back to the Future hit theaters in July 1985, the world erupted. Audiences couldn't get enough of Marty McFly, the skateboard-riding, guitar-shredding teenager who outsmarted bullies and drove a DeLorean through time. The movie became a cultural phenomenon, grossing over $380 million worldwide and turning Michael into a global superstar. Kids wanted to be him. Parents adored him. Hollywood couldn't get enough of him. He reprised the role in Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3, cementing his place as one of the most beloved actors of the era. But even with all the fame, Michael remained humble. He never acted like a superstar. He treated everyone, from co-stars to stagehands, with the same respect and kindness. He would often say, "I'm just a kid from Canada who got lucky." But those who knew him knew it wasn't luck, it was heart, grit, and undeniable talent. The 1980s belonged to Michael J. Fox. He was unstoppable. Or so it seemed. At first, it was easy to ignore. A slight tremor here. A little stiffness there. Nothing a busy actor couldn't shrug off. Michael was filming Doc Hollywood in 1991 when the symptoms became impossible to overlook. His left hand shook constantly now. Sometimes, his leg would spasm during takes. He'd clench his fist to hide it, make jokes to deflect, but fear had already taken root. After months of uncertainty, he finally went to see a specialist. The doctor ran tests, asked questions, and then sat him down with a look that froze the air in the room. Michael was only 29 years old. He expected to hear something mild, exhaustion, stress, maybe a nerve issue. Instead, the words hit him like a thunderclap. Words he could barely process, words that made no sense for a man his age. He sat in stunned silence as the doctor explained that it was rare, extremely rare, for someone so young. But there was no mistake. When he left the clinic that day, he didn't tell anyone what he'd been told. Not his family. Not even Tracy. He went back to work, smiling for the cameras, performing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Nights became sleepless. He would sit awake, staring at his hand, watching it tremble. Sometimes he'd press it against his chest, as if trying to still it by sheer will. He began drinking more, a desperate attempt to drown out the fear. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd find a cure, that it would go away. But it didn't. And the hardest part wasn't the physical struggle, it was the secret. For 7 long years, he kept it hidden from the world. Only Tracy knew. She became his strength, his confidant, the person who refused to let him disappear into despair. On screen, Michael continued to shine. For Love or Money, The American President, and the hit sitcom Spin City proved that he was still one of the best. But behind the laughter and applause, he was fighting an invisible battle. Friends began to notice small changes. His movements slower. His words, sometimes softer. But Michael brushed it off with humor, always humor. He didn't want pity. He didn't want people to see him as broken. Because for all the tremors and pain, one thing remained unshaken, his spirit. And soon, the world would find out just how powerful that spirit truly was. In public, Michael J. Fox was the same person everyone loved. The quick smile, the sharp wit, the twinkle in his eyes. But behind the closed doors of his Los Angeles home, the truth was very different. The diagnosis that had shattered his world was something he couldn't bring himself to say out loud. He was only 29, far too young for such words, too full of life to imagine what they meant. He came home that night and sat in silence at the kitchen table. Tracy knew something was wrong. When she asked, he just looked at her for a long moment before whispering, "They say, it's not going away." There were no dramatic breakdowns, no loud cries, just a quiet, devastating stillness between them. She reached across the table and took his trembling hand in hers. That night, the weight of their marriage vows, in sickness and in health, became more real than either had ever imagined. For years, they kept it secret. Michael continued to act, laugh, and live as if nothing had changed. He hid the tremors under his sleeves, timed his movements carefully, and became an expert at misdirection. Every morning before heading to the set, he'd look in the mirror and give himself a little pep talk. Smile. Be funny. Be Michael. But the toll was brutal. The tremors grew worse, the fatigue heavier. Some days, he'd barely manage to finish a scene before retreating to his trailer to rest. At night, he'd drink to quiet the anxiety, to silence the thoughts that wouldn't stop racing through his mind. Will I still be able to work? Will my kids remember me like this? How long before everyone finds out? Tracy became his anchor. She never let him wallow, never let him lose himself. When the fear got too loud, she reminded him of who he was, a fighter, a father, a man who still had more to give. As the years passed, Michael learned to live with the secret. He made jokes about his clumsiness, masked his pain behind his trademark humor. To fans, he was unstoppable, still the golden boy of the 80s, still the star they adored. But late at night, when the cameras were off and the laughter faded, the real battle began. The one no one saw, the one he fought with quiet courage every single day. He had no idea then that this private war would one day make him something far greater than a movie star. It would make him a symbol of resilience and hope for millions. It was 1998 when Michael J. Fox finally decided he couldn't hide anymore. 7 long years had passed since his diagnosis. Years of silence, fear, and pretending everything was fine. But the truth had grown too big to keep contained. The tremors were harder to control, the symptoms more visible. And more than that, he was tired, not just physically, but emotionally. So, he made one of the most difficult decisions of his life, to tell the world. When the announcement came, it hit like a shockwave. Michael J. Fox had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Fans around the globe were stunned. He was only 37, still so young, still so vibrant. Headlines filled newspapers, beloved star faces life-changing illness. Television hosts spoke through tears. Fans flooded message boards with love and disbelief. The world grieved, not because he was gone, but because they couldn't imagine a world where he might one day fade from their screens. In interviews, Michael remained composed. Sitting across from Barbara Walters, he spoke softly but confidently. His voice trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the disease itself. "I have Parkinson's. But I'm not going anywhere." He didn't want pity, he wanted purpose. He explained how he'd hidden his condition for years, how he'd felt shame and fear, and how finally sharing it lifted a burden from his shoulders. Now, he said, "I can just live." The response was overwhelming. Fans sent letters by the thousands, sharing their own stories of illness, loss, and hope. People who had felt invisible suddenly felt seen. Hollywood rallied around him. Co-stars, directors, and friends praised his honesty and bravery. Christopher Lloyd, his Back to the Future co-star, said, "He's the strongest man I know. He's teaching us all how to face life head-on." Shortly after going public, Michael made another tough choice: to step away from his hit sitcom Spin City. The disease made long shooting days too demanding, and he wanted to focus on his health and family. During his final episode, the studio audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Michael stood there, smiling, eyes glistening. "This isn't goodbye," he told them, his voice breaking slightly. "It's just, see you later." When the cameras cut, cast and crew surrounded him, many in tears. For Michael J. Fox, this was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of something far more important, a mission that would change lives around the world. When life takes something from you, sometimes it gives something back. Something greater, something lasting. For Michael J. Fox, that gift was purpose. In 2000, just 2 years after revealing his diagnosis, he founded the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, an organization dedicated to finding a cure and improving the lives of those living with the disease. What began as a small initiative quickly became the largest non-profit funder of Parkinson's research in the world. The foundation poured hundreds of millions into cutting-edge science, clinical trials, and patient support. But the real power of the foundation wasn't just money, it was Michael himself. He didn't just lend his name, he lived it. He met with scientists, spoke to patients, and gave countless interviews, all while fighting the disease himself. He used humor to defuse fear, empathy to inspire courage, and his platform to give voice to the voiceless. In a world where illness is often hidden or whispered about, Michael made it visible and honorable. He once said in an interview, "Parkinson's is a gift. It's not a gift you'd ask for, but once you open it, it keeps giving. It reminds me every day to be grateful for what I have." Those words moved millions. From congressional hearings to TED Talks, he became the face of resilience. His foundation attracted scientists, celebrities, and ordinary people who wanted to be part of something bigger, something hopeful. Over the years, his advocacy led to breakthroughs that changed the landscape of Parkinson's research. He testified before Congress, urging for more funding into neurological diseases, and his voice carried weight, not because he was famous, but because he was genuine. At every event, every speech, his message remained the same. You can't always choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you respond. He turned pain into power, suffering into purpose. For countless others battling Parkinson's, seeing Michael stand proudly, trembling but smiling, meant everything. He gave them hope. He gave them strength. And slowly, the world began to see him not as the actor who had Parkinson's, but as the man who changed what it meant to have it. Even as his symptoms worsened, Michael's determination never faltered. He kept showing up, for interviews, fundraisers, appearances, proving that his story was not one of tragedy, but triumph. By the mid-2000s, his foundation had raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and scientists credited him with bringing global awareness to a disease long overlooked. In doing so, Michael J. Fox became more than an actor, more than a celebrity. He became a symbol of courage, humor, and humanity at its most beautiful. The boy from Canada who once dreamed of Hollywood stardom had found something far greater. He had found his purpose. And he was just getting started. When most actors face a diagnosis as devastating as Parkinson's, the instinct is to retreat, to step away from the lights, the scripts, the scrutiny. But Michael J. Fox did the opposite. He walked back toward the spotlight, trembling but determined, with a quiet defiance that changed how Hollywood saw illness, resilience, and courage. After years of hiding his condition from the public, Michael returned to acting with new purpose. His 1990s sitcom Spin City became both a professional triumph and a deeply personal test. He was still the witty, fast-talking, effortlessly charming lead audiences loved, but off-camera, his hands shook uncontrollably, his muscles stiffened, his voice occasionally faltered. Yet somehow, he kept the laughter flowing. He adapted his performances, relying more on physical positioning, timing, and an uncanny ability to make vulnerability look like strength. Behind the scenes, cast members remember moments when Michael would grip the edge of a desk to steady his hand between takes or ask cameramen to shoot from specific angles. He never complained, one crew member recalled years later. He'd make jokes about it before anyone else could. He didn't want pity, he wanted partnership. When he finally stepped away from Spin City in 2000, it was with a heart heavy but hopeful. Fans feared they'd seen his last smile on screen. But Michael refused to let Parkinson silence him. Over the next decade, he re-emerged, this time in powerful guest roles that reflected the reality of his own body. In Rescue Me, Boston Legal, and later The Good Wife, his characters often battled ailments, yet they carried the same charm, humor, and humanity that defined his career. Each appearance reminded the world that Parkinson's could shake his body but not his spirit. Critics praised his performances not just for their authenticity, but for their audacity. Few actors had ever embraced their illness so openly, transforming it into art. Fans wrote letters by the thousands. "Watching you on screen gives me strength," one said. "If you can face the world with that kind of courage, I can face mine." Every role became a mirror of perseverance, not just for him, but for anyone fighting an invisible battle. Michael J. Fox, once the boy who embodied Hollywood youth, had become its symbol of endurance. But even heroes get tired. Even warriors stumble. As the years wore on, Parkinson's tightened its grip. The tremors grew stronger. His balance faltered. He began to fall, not occasionally but often. Sometimes in public, sometimes alone. Every step became an act of willpower. Still, Michael smiled. In interviews, he joked that he had become a human bobblehead. The humor masked the pain, but it also helped him endure. "You can't control what happens," he once said softly, "but you can control how you respond." Behind the laughter, though, were difficult nights. He struggled to sleep. His speech slowed. His body stiffened until it resisted simple movements. The man who once danced through scenes now had to focus on lifting a fork, turning a doorknob, walking a few steps without losing balance. Through it all, Tracy Pollan, his wife since 1988, never wavered. She became his steady ground, his anchor in the chaos. She learned how to help him dress, how to predict when a tremor was coming, how to hold his arm without taking his dignity. "She never sees me as a patient," he said once, smiling at her during a television interview. "She still sees me as me." The public saw only flashes of this private struggle. Red carpet appearances became rarer. When he did appear, fans noticed the frailty, the slight slur, the slow steps, but also the spark still burning in his eyes. He refused to hide. "People look at me and see Parkinson's," he said. "I look in the mirror and see optimism." The disease had changed his body, but not his essence. What remained, and perhaps grew even stronger, was his humility, his humor, and his unshakable grace. Though time and illness tried to quiet him, the world never stopped listening. Across the globe, millions continued to write letters, send emails, and post messages of support. Some were from fans who grew up watching Back to the Future and Family Ties. Others came from people battling diseases of their own, all thanking him for showing what courage truly looks like. His foundation, the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, had by then become a global force, raising over $1 billion for research. Scientists credited his advocacy with accelerating the search for a cure. They called him a bridge between science and humanity. But even as he changed medicine, he continued to change hearts. In one of his most emotional public appearances, Michael stood before a crowded auditorium at a charity event. His movements were slow, his voice quiet, but every word cut through the silence. "This disease tries to take away movement," he said, "but it can't take away my hope." The crowd rose in thunderous applause. Some cried. Some smiled through tears. For a moment, the tremors in his hands seemed to disappear. Or perhaps the world just stopped noticing them. Today, as the years stretch on, Michael J. Fox stands as something far greater than an actor or an activist. He is a living testament to perseverance, to love, to gratitude in the face of loss. And even as he slowly says goodbye to the public eye, one truth remains: the world still needs Michael, not because of what he can do, but because of what he has already given. In recent years, the world has seen a gentler, quieter Michael J. Fox. One who speaks less about ambition and more about appreciation. The fire in his eyes remains, but it burns differently now. Softer, steadier, almost sacred. His public appearances became rarer, and when they did happen, audiences noticed how reflective he'd become. Gone was the rapid-fire wit that once lit up every talk show stage. In its place was something deeper, a man unafraid to confront the truth of time. In one poignant interview, he said softly, "I'm not afraid of what's next. I'm closer to the end than the beginning, and that's okay." It was a line that lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Fans didn't want to believe it, not from him, not from the man who always seemed to bounce back. But Michael wasn't saying it for shock. He was saying it because it was true. The years of fighting Parkinson's had taken their toll. His movements were slower. His voice, softer. But there was something transcendent in his tone. A peace that came not from giving up, but from letting go. "I used to think about what I'd lose," he explained. "Now I think about what I still have, my family, my friends, my life. That's enough." Optimism, for Michael, was never about pretending things were fine. It was about finding beauty amid the chaos. He often spoke about gratitude like a form of medicine, a daily dose that healed what pain could not. You wake up, you're alive, that's already a win, he said. Behind closed doors, Tracy and the children saw the same spirit. There were nights of frustration, of course. Times when his body refused to cooperate. But even then, he found ways to make everyone laugh. If I fall, he joked once, at least I fall forward. That attitude became his legacy long before his final goodbye. Audiences around the world sensed that something was shifting, that the man who once raced through time on screen was, in his own quiet way, preparing to say farewell. And yet, in true Michael fashion, he faced that truth not with fear, but with faith. For him, life had always been about motion. Not the kind that happens in the body, but the kind that moves the heart. And as his world slowed, his heart only grew stronger. It happened almost without warning. Michael appeared on stage at a recent event, thinner, slower, but unmistakably himself. The audience, packed with fans who had followed his journey for decades, rose in thunderous applause. They didn't know it then, but they were witnessing a goodbye disguised as gratitude. He smiled, steadying himself on the podium. His hands trembled visibly, but his eyes, those bright knowing eyes, still sparkled with warmth. The room fell silent. He looked around, breathing deeply, and then spoke in a voice that wavered but never broke. "Thank you for letting me be part of your lives." It was a simple line. But in those words, decades of love, pain, laughter, and endurance seemed to pour out all at once. He paused, swallowed hard, then added, "You've all given me more than I could ever give back." The audience erupted in emotion. Some clapped. Some wept openly. Cameras caught fans wiping away tears, whispering, "We love you, Michael." For many, it was the first time they truly understood the weight of his words. This wasn't just another appearance. It was a farewell. The clip spread across the internet within hours. Social media filled with tributes, pictures of his younger self, quotes from Back to the Future, heartfelt messages from people who had grown up watching him. "He taught us how to live with grace," one fan wrote. "Now he's teaching us how to say goodbye." Celebrities joined in too, actors, directors, musicians, all paying tribute to a man who had touched their lives. Michael J. Fox is the definition of courage, one post read. "If you ever doubt the goodness of humanity, look at him." Even those who had never met him felt the loss deeply. It was as though the world had collectively realized that an era, one built on hope, humor, and resilience, was nearing its end. But for Michael, that moment wasn't about endings. It was about gratitude. As he left the stage, supported by his wife, he smiled at the crowd one last time. It was the same smile that had charmed millions, now softer, but infinitely more powerful. The applause followed him long after he was gone. Michael J. Fox's true legacy isn't found in awards or headlines. It's written in the hearts of those he inspired. Yes, there are the tangible achievements, an Emmy-winning career, a billion-dollar foundation, groundbreaking advancements in Parkinson's research. But what makes his story immortal is the way he made people feel. He gave humanity a face, one that was brave, imperfect, and endlessly kind. The Michael J. Fox Foundation stands as his greatest contribution beyond the screen. Since its creation in 2000, it has become the world's largest non-profit funder of Parkinson's research. Scientists credit him with changing the landscape of the disease, not just by funding studies, but by drawing attention, urgency, and compassion to a cause once ignored. Michael didn't just raise money, one neurologist said. He raised awareness, and with that he raised hope. But his impact goes even deeper than medicine. He redefined what it means to live with dignity. For countless people facing illness, disability, or loss, his story became a beacon. If Michael can do it, they would say, so can I. He leaves behind a model of courage that transcends fame, one rooted in humility and humor. Even at his weakest moments, he found light in laughter. Even when he stumbled, he found grace in falling. And then there's his family, the people who stood beside him through every tremor, every triumph. For Tracy and their children, his legacy isn't just public, it's deeply personal. He taught us how to live without fear, Tracy once said. And that's something we'll carry forever. The world will remember Michael J. Fox not for what Parkinson's took, but for what he gave. He gave his energy to a cause, his honesty to his fans, and his heart to humanity. And though his voice may someday fade from the stage, its echo, that of hope, humor, and love, will never disappear. When news of Michael's declining health became known, Hollywood mourned in unison. Colleagues, co-stars, and friends poured out memories that painted a portrait of a man whose kindness had quietly changed lives. Christopher Lloyd, his Back to the Future co-star, spoke through tears at a reunion event. "We spent years pretending to travel through time," he said, voice cracking. "But the truth is, Michael showed us how precious time really is. The audience wept. So did Michael, watching from the side of the stage, smiling through his tears. Leah Thompson, who played Lorraine in the trilogy, shared her own tribute. He made everyone feel seen. Even on tough days, he'd flash that grin and remind us why we loved what we did. He's the soul of those films, and of all of us. From Family Ties castmates to directors and producers who had worked with him over decades, the same theme echoed: gratitude. Gratitude for his professionalism, his warmth, his humor, and his extraordinary heart. A private Back to the Future reunion later that year brought the cast together for what felt like both a celebration and a farewell. Photos from the event showed laughter and tears, Michael in the center, holding Christopher Lloyd's hand, surrounded by friends who had become family. It was a moment frozen in time, fitting for the man who once played a time traveler who changed history. Hollywood, for all its glitter and glamour, rarely pauses. But for Michael J. Fox, it did. Studios dimmed their lights for a minute of silence. Award shows honored him not as a star, but as a symbol. He showed us that being human, one director said, is the greatest role you can ever play. In the end, that was Michael's gift to the world, not just his films or his foundation, but his reminder that life, even when shaken, can still be beautiful. And though he may be quietly stepping away from the spotlight, Hollywood, and the millions who love him, will never stop watching, never stop remembering, and never stop saying, "Thank you, Michael, for everything." In the decades of footage that capture his career, from the witty teenager on Family Ties to the time-traveling hero of Back to the Future and the courageous advocate of later years, one thing never changed: his smile. That same boyish grin that first lit up television screens in the 1980s somehow survived every hardship. Even as Parkinson's reshaped his body, that smile remained, unbroken and unstoppable. It became his signature, his message, his quiet rebellion against despair. Archival clips show him laughing in interviews, joking with fans, teasing talk show hosts, even while his hands trembled uncontrollably. He refused to let illness define his joy. "If laughter disappears," he said, "then the disease wins. I can't let that happen." Doctors and researchers admired him not only for his advocacy but for his spirit. Michael made science human, one neurologist shared. He reminded us that behind every diagnosis is a story worth fighting for. His humor was never forced. It was pure, unfiltered truth, the kind that can only come from someone who has looked at life's darkest corners and still chosen light. "I'm not a victim," he once said. "I'm just a guy figuring it out, one shaky day at a time." Fans across the world began to echo his philosophy. Support groups were formed under the banner of his words, and thousands of people living with Parkinson's began referring to themselves as Fox Warriors. His influence transcended celebrity; it became a global movement of hope. Friends describe his laughter as contagious, his presence as calming, his optimism as unforgettable. Christopher Lloyd once said, "Michael could be falling apart and still find something to joke about." That's his magic. And that magic, that smile, will forever be what the world remembers. Not the tremors, not the struggles, but the man who never stopped smiling, even when life gave him every reason to stop. If Michael's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss the video that truly matter.